All right, guys, welcome back. It's part four of our skull video. But you know what? We're getting there. And this is the very last steps to making sure that our skull is on its way to being completely finished, or at least finished for this tutorial before you go on your own and design your skull however you would like to go through and design it. So for part four, we're just really going in and creating some darker details onto our skull, really going through and highlighting some of our particular lines that are very important to the facial structure, and just kind of putting in those extra additional details, right? So that is what we are doing in part four, and then you will be off on your own to redesign your skull however you would like for your final project, okay? So of course, we always want to make sure that we have a pencil handy and, of course, a lovely eraser. You can use your kneaded eraser, or if your pencil has a great eraser, mine happens to have a really nice eraser on it, you can use that as well. So remember, as always, when we go through, if we're creating any type of construction lines, we always want to draw them light. That way, when we get to this point, we can really go through and erase out some of the lines that we just don't need anymore. So these are going to be the final steps, the final finishing touches for our skull, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define this area where the side of the skull is, okay? From where the side of the skull is to where it connects to our eye sockets and kind of the bone around our eyes. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a line from where we took this line here, connecting our eye socket to the bone around our eye. And I'm just going to kind of create like a nice little curved line, kind of going up a little bit and then curving upward. And remember, what we do on one side, we have to do to the other. I'm going to use my paper just to go through and make sure that I'm not messing up or kind of spreading around any of the graphite on the other side. And I'm going to do the same thing. So this little diagonal line that we connected our eye to the outside bone of our eye, we're just going to create a nice little line that kind of goes up, curves up a little bit, and then curves up again, right? So that's kind of solidifying the side of our head, the side of our skull, gives it a little bit more definition so that we have more of a separate area or a defined area between where the side is and where the front of it is, and then also kind of connecting it down to where our eyes are. So there you go. We're going to go through and just add in a few lines just to kind of connect this area, because that should be like a full bone itself. So I just want to have a little line that connects those areas together. That way it looks kind of more like that brow bone coming in over, right? So where your eyebrows is, that's an actual bone. If you use your, index fingers and you touch your face, where your eyebrow is, you'll kind of feel that it's more protruding, right? Which means it's sticking out, and that's your brow bone. So we want to make sure that we actually see that in there. And from there, I'm just going to do a couple little lines just coming down and out. That kind of gives more definition to the area around our eye, right? Kind of forming that shape just a little bit more. And I'm going to create another line coming down around my eye socket and through my cheekbone, which again is just, these are just the finishing touches. This is just the additional detail that we want to show. Kind of just solidifies the look of the eye just a little bit more. All right. And on this tutorial that I'm looking at, it kind of like has these little sections here, which are kind of like just little divots in the face. You can put those if you want. You don't have to though. It's not really that important. We're going to go through and just kind of where this triangle was, where our nose was, I'm kind of just going to curve those lines a little bit more to give my nose more of its final shape and less boxy and triangular. So I'm going to erase out kind of those other lines. And remember, you can always go back and adjust the shape if it's not exactly perfect or the way that you like it. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Always going back and kind of perfecting our work. And we're just going to draw another line that kind of matches that same curve of the bottom of our nose. So it should be pretty parallel. It's just going to come in and then around. Okay, again, these are the finishing touches. So this is the stuff that's just going to add a little bit of detail just to make things look just a little bit more realistic. Okay, where we had these very pointed cheekbones, of course nobody's cheekbones are that pointy, so we just want to go through and just kind of round them out a bit to make it look more realistic and not so kind of boxy and very angular, right? Although men tend to have more angular faces, and we kind of talked about that when we were doing like portrait work, really when it comes to the skull, nothing is so perfectly angular where it meets at a point like that, right? So anytime we have edges where you're doing any type of anatomy, so any type of drawing of like bone structure, you're never normally gonna have bones or that meet exactly at a point like that. So we can always go through and kind of just round out those areas to make it look a little bit more realistic, right? The next thing that we're gonna do is from where our cheekbone areas are, we're gonna have a little line that kind of connects down to where the mouth is. So it's going to really separate that area from where the top of your mouth is to connecting to the cheekbones. And what we're gonna do is just go in a little bit on this curve, kind of take it down, and then curve it into the top of where your mouth ends, right? So this top area. So again, and it doesn't matter if you start at the top here or at the bottom. So last time I started at the top, I can start from the top again and go down, but I could also start from the bottom and go up, right? So I can go up from where the edge of my mouth is, and then kind of just connect that line. Like so. I do like that I did it a little bit more curved on that side. This side was a little bit more straighter. So I'm gonna go back and I'm just gonna kind of fix that again. There we go. That looks a little bit better. All right. And what I also want to do is I want to kind of fix my jawline a little bit. Okay, remember, although men tend to be very angular when it comes to jawline, it's not going to be a perfect angle, right? So it should have a little bit of roundness quality to it. So I'm going to go through and kind of just darken that line just a little bit. And as it comes to the bottom here, I'm just going to start curving that line a little bit more and curving the line at the bottom of where my chin is. If you want, you can give it more of like a cleft chin, right? Where it kind of meets at the point. Some people call it a butt chin, haha, right? But you can do that, or you can just kind of keep it a little bit more rounded and not as pronounced. That's completely up to you and how you want your skull to look, right? But I'm just gonna go through and I'm just gonna kind of clean up those edges just by rounding them out a little bit more. There we go. And I do want to connect my cheekbones here to where the top of my skull is, right? Because it kind of just looks like the top of my skull is just almost sitting on top of my cheekbones. And I really want to go through and just kind of add them together a little bit more. So I'm just going to create like a nice little curved line from the edge. And I'm just going to connect it to where the edge of my skull is. Okay, that way it looks a little bit more realistic, like they're attached and not just sitting on top of one another. So again, I'm gonna go from the corner edge here, all right? And I'm just gonna kind of connect them together. And while I do that, I can kind of go through and just darken the area of my skull And I can even start erasing out some of this extra area that I don't really need to see, right? Because then it's gonna kind of mess with the illusion of the skull being all one piece. So after you start really forming the lines on your skull and you start darkening lines, you can kind of see where you can erase certain lines, right? So when I'm looking at my skull, I don't need this line here, right? I really don't need this line. And I really don't need most of these guidelines, right? So I can just erase them out so that I just see my skull and not all of these extra additional guidelines, right? So hopefully you drew your lines very lightly so that you're able to go back and erase them. Of course, we don't want to go through and erase any lines that we actually need, but some of these lines, like where the bottom of our circle is, we can erase those out, right? Because we don't really need them. Whoop. So I'm just going to kind of go through and I'm going to just erase some lines that I think are unnecessary, lines that kind of mess with what the design looks like. Right, like all of these guidelines inside the nose. I definitely don't need those. Coming across the face, and this is why we want to make sure that we're always drawing very lightly. That way we can go back and we can erase these guidelines and have a nice drawn image without seeing all of those additional guidelines, right? And of course, any lines that you are going to keep, you can go over them to be a little bit darker. That's completely fine. Remember, you're going to be transforming this skull into a design of your choice, right? So you're going to be transforming this skull into the design of your choice. So you may not want to erase all of your lines just yet, or you may not want to darken all of your lines just yet. You know, maybe you went through and you really darkened part of the skull, but then you want to make it look like the skull is cracked open. Well, the effect is not going to look as good if you've already darkened that line. So before you go through and really darken too many lines, I really want you to think of how are you going to transform your skull? What are you going to make your skull look like? And where are you going to darken the lines that match with your design, and where are you going to have to erase lines, right? Because you may end up wanting to erase lines. Maybe you don't want all of the teeth to be in there because maybe you want him to look like he's missing teeth or she's missing teeth, you know, whatever your skull may be. So, you know, it's not always best to go through and just immediately start darkening lines, but you want to think about it a little bit. And I especially want you to think about how are you going to design this skull? How are you going to transform it so that it looks unique, so that it looks like nobody else drew it but you, okay? So keep that in mind, keep it individual, but keep it fun, right? This is Halloween, it's spooky season, so go ahead and your project, your final for this drawing is going to be to transform your drawing into anything you'd like. You are free to use any type of color that you would like to help transform your skull, but if you'd also just like to keep using pencil and just create different values, that's also cool too, right? So it's up to you and however you decide to design your skull. Remember, you are only limited by your own creativity and imagination. So again, have fun with it, enjoy it, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with.